Welcome to the Deep Dive, your source for dense, actionable knowledge, extracted directly from the front lines of global affairs and technology. Today, we are deep diving into the SolarWind's incident, or the Sunburst attack, an event that didn't just expose vulnerabilities, it fundamentally shattered the digital trust upon which the modern internet is built.
It really is mandatory viewing for anyone in risk management or governance. We are talking about what Microsoft President Brad Smith, I think, accurately described as the largest and most sophisticated attack the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
And that designation isn't hyperbole. It precisely defines the strategic genius of the adversary.
So if you are prepping for that high-stakes board meeting on cybersecurity governance, or maybe if you simply need to understand why zero trust is no longer just an aspiration, but a mandate, this is your deep dive.
Definitely.
Our mission today is to take you through the meticulous chronology of this patient multi-month operation, an operation that exposed the core flaw in traditional security, that dangerous assumption of inherent trust in reputable software vendors.
That assumption, that was the core vulnerability they really exploited. When you download a signed software update from a trusted provider, you're basically granting it unfettered access to your deepest internal networks. For decades, that was just standard procedure.
Right, just how things were done.
Exactly. The SolarWind's attack weaponized that very procedure, it redefined corporate accountability, and it forced every major organization globally to acknowledge that the perimeter, it's obsolete. We're going to unpack how this event really paved the road to the zero trust era.
Okay, let's get into that strategic pivot then. Why SolarWinds? For the listener who might not be deep in IT management, SolarWinds is, well, it's an enormously influential company, right? They produce IT management tools, the big one being the Orion platform.
Exactly. Orion is essentially the nervous system for any major network. It monitors servers, applications, performance, configurations, you name it.
So it needs deep access.
It requires deep, privileged access across the entire organization just to function properly. By targeting SolarWinds, the adversary chose a single point of failure that offered maximum leverage, maximum impact. I mean, this is the definition of a supply chain attack.
So instead of knocking on thousands of doors, like, say, the Department of Justice or major defense contractors, they focused all their energy on infiltrating SolarWinds, this central delivery mechanism. It's an economy of force.
Precisely. By weaponizing SolarWinds' legitimate, digitally signed software updates, they guarantee that the malicious code was delivered directly to the most critical, sensitive systems in the world. Systems that, ironically, were designed to be secured by tools like Orion.
And the potential scope, just based on the sources we looked at, it was staggering. We know up to 18,000 customers downloaded those Trojanized updates. That's just a massive global footprint of compromise waiting to happen.
It really is.
But the sheer selectivity of the exploitation that followed is maybe the most telling detail, isn't it?
That's the crucial distinction, right, between potential exposure and actual intent. While 18,000 entities received the backdoor, the attackers only pursued follow-on, hands-on keyboard activity.
Actually doing something with the access.
Right, actually moving laterally within the network, stealing data against a much smaller, highly targeted number of organizations. The estimates are somewhere in the low hundreds.
But why the waste then? Why compromise 18,000 systems if you only really want, say, 50? Couldn't they have just targeted SolarWinds customers who were specifically, defense contractors?
Well, that's a key point about state-sponsored tradecraft. They weren't looking for a list of targets. They were looking for a list of potential backdoors they could use selectively, maybe later, maybe whenever they needed.
Options.
Exactly. Options and cover. By infecting 18,000, they blended the activity into this massive global noise. The initial infection wasn't really the attack. It was the mechanism to gain persistent access for future attacks. That broad infection provided phenomenal operational security, or OPSEC.
And the victim list, it really confirms this espionage motive. We're not talking about small businesses here.
No way.
We're talking about the crown jewels of national security. The U.S. Departments of Treasury, Homeland Security, Justice, Commerce, Energy. Plus the private sector tech giants holding critical IP. Microsoft, Intel, Cisco.
The motive was clearly long-term cyber espionage, strategic intelligence gathering. This group, they weren't financially motivated. If they had been,
it would have looked very different.
Completely different. They would have tried to monetize the access to all 18,000 victims,
Right.
Probably deploy ransomware, launch massive data theft ops. But their surgical precision, focusing on things like policy documents, sanctions information, high-level government communications. It just confirms they were state spies operating on a geopolitical agenda.
The genius of this operation, the thing that really sets it apart, is the meticulous, almost exhausting patience displayed by the adversary. This wasn't a quick smash and grab. It was like a year-long siege requiring incredible discipline.
That extended timeline is the defining feature, absolutely. It really illustrates the difference between its state-sponsored actors and, say, traditional organized crime.
Yeah.
We can break this down into 3 core phases, starting with the deep reconnaissance.
Okay. Phase 1, infiltration and surveillance. This stretches from September 2019 all the way to February 2020. The sources confirm the attackers initially gained unauthorized access to the SolarWind's internal network way back on September 4, 2019.
Yeah.
That's 16 months before the public knew anything was wrong.
16 months of silence.
Yeah.
And that initial access, it wasn't used to start slinging malware around immediately. No, it was used purely for reconnaissance. They needed to map SolarWind's internal systems, understand their software development lifecycle, the processes for coding, testing, distribution.
That built the sausage.
Exactly.
Right.
And most crucially, they needed to identify the build server environment. They had to know how to inject code seamlessly without setting off any alarms.
And this leads directly to what the sources are calling the trial run. This is where they really started weaponizing that knowledge.
The trial run, conducted between September and November 2019, was absolutely critical. This is where they injected test code, completely non-malicious, benign code, into the Orion platform.
Just to see if they could.
Just to see. The whole purpose was validation. Could they actually modify the software? Would SolarWind's internal integrity checks flag the changes? Would the modified software successfully compile and then distribute without anyone noticing?
So they essentially tested SolarWind's own defenses against themselves, using their system against them, but without firing the actual, weapon.
Precisely. They validated the entire attack chain. And that 6-month duration between getting initial access and deploying the actual payload, Sunburst, it demonstrates strategic patience that's just financially non-viable for most threat actors out there.
Right.
It's the signature of an adversary working on a national timeline, not a quarterly profit cycle.
Okay, so with the successful trial run complete, they move into phase 2, supply chain weaponization. This is February to June 2020. This is the main event where the weapon itself was deployed.
Right. On February 20, 2020, they deployed the mechanism known as Espionage into the SolarWind's build environment. Now, this piece of malware was designed specifically to wait. It watched for the compilation process of the Orion platform to start.
Okay.
Once the software was compiled, then it contained the actual payload, the Sunburst backdoor. This Trojanized update was then digitally signed with SolarWind's legitimate certificate, a crucial step that gave it instant trust across firewalls worldwide, and then distributed between March and June 2020.
Which means the backdoor was just sitting there, dormant, in thousands of critical global networks for at least 6 to 9 months before anyone figured it out.
That's right. Which brings us to phase 3, the discovery in December 2020. And the discovery itself, well, it's a lesson in proactive threat hunting. Well, the way this whole operation came to light is, frankly, a huge irony. It wasn't discovered by some automated system or a firewall or an endpoint protection product. Nope. It was discovered because the cybersecurity firm FireEye announced in early December 2020 that it had been breached, and its proprietary red team tools had been stolen.
Wow. So the investigation into one massive breach led them to uncover an even bigger, more systemic global attack.
Exactly. While FireEye was conducting really robust human-led threat hunting, not just relying on standard logs, on their own compromised network, their analysts identified this very specific pattern of anomalous network activity.
Okay.
And that activity was eventually traced back not to some external IP address, but to FireEye's own installed and trusted SolarWind's Orion software. They suddenly realized the attacker wasn't external, they were internal, disguised as a necessary system tool.
That one thread just pulled the entire tapestry apart.
It really did. And the fallout was immediate. FireEye notified SolarWinds on December 12th. They went public on December 13th. And by December 14th, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, issued an emergency directive ordering every federal agency to immediately disconnect or power down the Orion platform.
Wow.
That whole system of inherent trust just collapsed in 48 hours.
Okay, moving from the timeline to the mechanics. The sophistication here is what truly demands a deep dive. This wasn't just, standard malware. It was a multi-stage, custom-built system designed specifically to defeat highly regulated software development practices. Let's start with NS Pika, the build server hijacker.
Fishan Pika is really the architectural genius of the whole campaign. It was malware that resided, highly protected, right there on SolarWind's build servers. Its function was basically to monitor the compilation process. Specifically, it was waiting for the msbuild.exe process, that's the Microsoft build engine, to start compiling the Orion platform software.
And the brilliance was in how it managed the injection, right? They consciously decided not to modify the source code repository itself because they knew that would probably trigger Git checks and code integrity reviews.
That's the definition of insider-level understanding.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Instead of tampering with the source code, Senyu was designed to replace a legitimate source file during the actual compilation process. It intercepted the build just as the legitimate source file was being processed, injected the Sunburst code, compiled the now malicious binary, and then, this is critical, it immediately performed a cleanup.
So by the time the compilation finished, the final binary had the backdoor hidden inside, but the original source code repository looked pristine. It would pass every automated integrity check SolarWinds had in place.
Exactly. That technique, it demonstrates a profound understanding of the software's build environment. The timings, the dependencies, it's far beyond what you'd expect from a typical financially motivated group.
Okay, so once that signed compromise binary was distributed, it contained Sunburst, the dormant backdoor, and its operational security, its OPSEC, was designed specifically to avoid detection and ensure only the most critical targets were engaged.
The OPSEC for Sunburst was extraordinary. First off, the sleep timer. It was programmed to lie dormant for 12 to 14 days after installation.
Why?
That delay makes linking any suspicious network activity back to the initial patch installation date incredibly difficult for forensic teams. It breaks the causal chain.
Clever. And then the anti-analysis checks, which you mentioned, were numerous and specifically designed to stop researchers from executing it in, like, a sandbox environment.
Yeah, it performed exhaustive checks. It verified process names, but it didn't just check the name string. It performed a custom hash computation on those names.
Yeah.
If the hash didn't match a very specific expected set of hashes for a live real-world environment, it just wouldn't execute. Furthermore, it had a hard-coded block list of domains, specifically designed to avoid running in known security research labs, virtual machines, or even SolarWinds' own internal testing environments. It was programmed to run only in high-value production environments.
But the most important feature, the one that really tells us about their intent, their espionage focus, is this remote kill switch.
The kill switch is the smoking gun for their surgical intent. A mass marketing criminal operation doesn't build a remote kill switch. This feature allowed the perpetrators to deliberately deactivate Sunburst across huge swaths of those 18,000 compromised entities.
Right.
They essentially said, okay, we filtered the world down to the 100 or so targets we truly care about for intelligence purposes, now shut down the rest. This minimized their digital footprint and drastically reduced the chance of detection by, incidental victims who weren't the real targets.
And to do all this, they needed to communicate with their command and control servers, their C2, without triggering alarms. Blending in was key.
C2 traffic is typically pretty easy to spot, unusual domains, strange protocols. This group was smarter. They actually designed their C2 traffic to mimic the legitimate Orion Improvement Program, or OIP, protocol.
So it looked like normal SolarWinds traffic.
Exactly. It looked like standard, trusted SolarWinds telemetry data just phoning home.
They also used a domain generation algorithm, a DGA. We hear that term a lot, but what does it mean in practice here, and why was it so effective?
Right. So a DGA means the malware algorithmically generates thousands of potential C2 domains dynamically on the fly. The specific DGA used here created domains that looked kind of plausible, like avsvmcloud.com.
Okay.
But crucially, the attackers only registered one or two of these domains at any given time. This makes it nearly impossible for network defenders to preemptively block them all. There are just too many possibilities. And because the traffic was mimicking OIP and talking to a semi-legitimate looking cloud domain name, it just sailed past network analysis tools. Then, post-exploitation, once they decided to actually proceed with a target, they used customized loaders like Teardrop and Raindrop to deliver tools like Cobalt Strike.
Which is a common pen testing tool, right?
A very advanced penetration testing framework,
Yeah.
used to establish persistence and achieve lateral movement deeper into the victim networks.
Okay, this level of operational security, the sheer patience, the technical complexity, it strongly points toward a specific type of actor. Let's talk attribution.
Attribution is always politically complex, right? Initially, the intelligence community referred to the actors very cautiously as likely Russian in origin. That careful phrasing is necessary because attributing a major attack like this to a nation-state is effectively an act of diplomatic confrontation.
But that caution was ultimately replaced with formal identification in April 2021, wasn't it?
Correct. Both the U.S. and the U.K. formally attributed the attack to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. Now, this group is very well known in the security community by various monikers: APT-29, Nobelium, Cozy Bear.
Heard those names.
Yeah, they have a long history of targeting governments, think tanks, research institutions, and they are universally regarded by analysts as having truly top-notch operational security and tradecraft.
And their operational security was remarkable, especially concerning how they neutralized a really fundamental detection method used by most large organizations, flagging logins from unexpected geographical locations. You're talking about the residential IP trick.
This specific tactic, it just showcases the brilliance of their OPSEC. The core challenge for any foreign state actor is blending in. If you log into the U.S. Treasury network from an IP address in Moscow, well, alarms are going to go off instantly.
Sure.
Their solution was to use residential IP addresses, which they got from brokers who essentially rent out or leverage hijacked home internet connections.
So when the attacker logged in, the security system just saw an IP address associated with, say, a Comcast connection in Reston, Virginia, not a server farm in Eastern Europe. It looked exactly like a remote worker logging in from home.
Exactly. This tactic completely neutralized the entire security apparatus designed to flag foreign or unusual geolocated logins. It made the malicious activity utterly indistinguishable from normal, authorized remote work traffic. It's like technical social engineering, exploiting the sheer volume of legitimate remote access that companies now rely on. Incredible attention to detail.
We can also map their sophisticated tactics, techniques, and procedures. The TTP is using the UNR ATT&CK framework. This gives us a really granular picture of how they managed defense evasion and maintained that access.
Yeah, looking at their TTPs, the techniques used for privilege escalation and access were highly technical. A prime example is the forging of SAML tokens.
Yeah.
SAML, that's the security assertion markup language. It's what systems use for single sign-on.
And what's the mechanism of that attack? It sounds incredibly complex.
It is pretty complex. By compromising certain on-premise components, specifically stealing the SAML signing certificate, the attackers could then generate their own valid, authentic-looking SAML tokens.
Okay.
This allowed them to completely bypass multi-factor authentication MFA and impersonate any user within cloud environments like Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Once you have a valid token, the system just says, "Welcome, trusted user," completely ignoring the MFA challenge because the token itself is the proof of identity.
Wow. So MFA, often touted as the silver bullet against unauthorized access, they just found an ingenious way to sidestep it entirely.
And their defense evasion, it extended to covering their tracks deep inside the victim network, too. They went directly after the audit trail. They used Audit TPL, which is a legitimate Windows utility, to disable Windows event logging,
So no logs.
preventing the collection of crucial security audit logs. They also used the Service Control Manager to disable specific security monitoring services. And then, once they had stolen data, their exfiltration technique was equally stealthy, using 7-zip to compress stolen emails and files into password-protected archives before sending them out. That makes detection by data loss prevention, or DLP, systems much, much harder.
It's vital we balance this discussion of attacker genius with the internal failure that really made the attack possible in the first place. Why was SolarWinds so vulnerable to such a protracted attack for nearly a year and a half? It really comes down to systemic weakness, doesn't it? Not just a single exploitable software bug.
That's the core takeaway for the governance world. Absolutely. The vulnerability wasn't a CVE, not a specific fixable software flaw you could just patch. It was a fundamental failure of corporate process and oversight. The attackers exploited a profound weakness in SolarWind's software development lifecycle, their SDL. They exploited systemic failures in basic operational security and, frankly, culture.
And the consequences of that failure, well, they led to the unprecedented legal action by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, against SolarWinds and its Chief Information Security Officer, Timothy Brown. This is where the failure becomes personally and financially devastating.
Yeah, the SEC allegations are severe precisely because they establish a direct link between technical failure and corporate misrepresentation to investors. The complaint detailed that SolarWinds allegedly failed to comply with a majority of the controls outlined in the respected NIST cybersecurity framework.
A majority. Wow.
A majority, despite making public statements that implied a robust security posture to investors.
Can you elaborate on the kind of fundamental hygiene issues they found? Because this wasn't about, like, esoteric 0 days, was it?
Absolutely not. It involved really fundamental failures that any security professional would flag immediately. The sources detailed deficient access controls, too many employees having unnecessary administrative privileges.
Basic stuff.
Basic stuff. There was also documented weak password protection enforcement, just fundamental cyber hygiene. And most importantly, the Orion platform itself lacked a proper risk-based secure development lifecycle. That's what allowed SolarWind's to execute its malicious code injection during the build process without triggering any alerts.
The SEC pursuing the CISO personally. That's the real seismic shift here, isn't it? What does that signal about the changing legal landscape for senior executives?
It is a landmark legal action. Suing the CISO individually signals a profound shift. It elevates cybersecurity failure from just an IT problem to a fiduciary and legal responsibility for senior management.
Right.
The complaint alleged that the CISO was aware of significant internal vulnerabilities and deficiencies, yet allegedly allowed the company to make statements that could be interpreted as misrepresenting the actual security posture to the investing public. This sends a powerful message. If you're responsible for cyber risk and you fail to disclose known critical vulnerabilities, you may be held personally accountable.
It essentially turns cyber risk into a material business risk, just like financial fraud risk. You can't just pay lip service to security anymore. You actually have to implement it.
That's the clear mandate. Now, there is an interesting nuance here. While the SEC's case against the CISO is proceeding, a judge did dismiss some of the initial SEC claims related to internal accounting controls.
Oh.
Yeah. The judge noted that those specific laws were originally created to address traditional financial fraud and may not be perfectly equipped, at least in their current form, to govern all dimensions of corporate cyber risk disclosure and management.
Which, ironically, kind of exposes a regulatory gap itself, doesn't it? Existing legislation struggles to keep pace with the evolving nature of these sophisticated supply chain threats, even as the government and regulators try to force accountability through existing securities laws.
Exactly. So if the SolarWinds incident was the diagnosis, then the strategic lessons are really the mandatory treatment plan for the digital world moving forward.
And lesson 1 seems crystal clear, the new imperative of supply chain security. We just cannot rely on perimeter firewalls anymore. The attack proved an organization's security is completely dependent on its weakest vendor link,
which requires a massive shift in third-party risk management, or TPRM. Organizations have got to move beyond mere contractual agreements now. They need continuous vendor risk assessments, demanding verifiable evidence of security controls, not just, compliance forms checked off.
Right.
And there also needs to be radical industry collaboration, a shift from isolated defense to what people are calling collaborative security, where intelligence about shared threats is exchanged immediately, not months later.
Okay, lesson 2 addresses the heart of the compromise itself. Secure development is now absolutely non-negotiable. If you sell software, your build environment is a primary existential target.
Build systems must be treated as sacred ground. They can't be treated like standard development workstations anymore. They're critical production systems, and they require the absolute highest level of security controls. The long-term solution the industry is now rapidly moving toward is the adoption of verified reproducible builds.
Explain that for the listener. How does a reproducible build actually solve the SunSBOS problem?
Okay, so a reproducible build means that any independent party can take the official source code, run the exact same compilation process, and the resulting software binary will be cryptographically identical bit for bit to the binary the vendor distributed. If code injection like SunSBOS happens during the compilation, the resulting binary will be different, the hash won't match, and the malicious injection is instantly detectable. It removes the element of blind trust entirely and makes hidden code ingestion nearly impossible to sustain.
Okay, lesson 3 focuses on detection. The failure of traditional signature-based security. The attackers, as you said, randomize their actions precisely to defeat automated systems looking for fixed patterns.
Yeah, we have to move beyond simple block lists and signature definitions. The human element of threat hunting is now non-negotiable. Organizations must invest in proactive, skilled human teams who leverage advanced behavioral analysis through tools like security information and event management, SIEM and endpoint detection and response, or EDR solutions.
How do those help?
These tools analyze deviations from normal behavior, like a trusted Orion process, suddenly communicating over an unusual port, or encrypting data unexpectedly. These are things that are far harder for sophisticated actors to evade than just avoiding known bad signatures.
And this leads inevitably, it sounds like, to the core mandate, zero trust.
Absolutely. The SolarWinds incident basically made zero trust architecture the standard operating philosophy, or at least the goal everyone's striving for. It mandates continuous verification of every entity, every device, every transaction, regardless of whether it originates from inside or outside the traditional network perimeter.
So you no longer inherently trust a machine just because it has a company logo on it or an internal IP address.
Yeah. Exactly. You assume, compromise, and verify every single step. Trust nothing. Verify everything.
Finally, we have to grasp lesson 4. Eradication requires extremes. Why couldn't victims just install a clean patch from SolarWinds and, move on?
Because the depth of the compromise was just too extensive. The attackers hadn't just installed one backdoor, they had pervasive access and the ability to deploy customized, persistent post-exploitation tools like Teardrop, Raindrop, and that supernova web shell that was discovered later. You could simply never be certain you had found and neutralized every single persistence point they might have left behind.
So the experts recommended basically a nuclear option.
Essentially, yes. The consensus recommendation from security experts at the time was a full rebuild of the affected host systems, along with the complete rebuilding of the entire identity trust store and environment, meaning replacing potentially compromised hardware and completely resetting all identity credentials, all trust relationships, everything, just to guarantee the attacker was fully expelled.
Yeah.
This painful, expensive reality really underscores the sheer strategic impact of the attack. It wasn't just a cleanup. It was often a complete reset.
So the SolarWinds incident was clearly more than just a headline. It was a permanent, non-reversible mandate for organizational change. It definitively ended the era where security was primarily based on a trusted perimeter or, a handful of siloed, compliant security programs.
It did.
It exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in technology, in governance, and in corporate transparency that can really never be unlearned.
The legacy of Sunburst is that supply chain security and individual executive accountability are now permanent national security and business priorities.
Yeah.
Every senior executive, every board member must now ask really existential questions about the integrity of the digital ecosystem they rely upon every single day.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to explore. The SolarWinds attackers spent nearly a year patiently surveilling SolarWinds' internal development processes before launching their attack. So what essential technology or vendor in your organization today is so deeply and maybe unquestioningly trusted that no one is currently checking its internal processes for a similar, patient, and potentially invisible infiltration?